up a bit, not seem like the same old thing. The Warthog can now execute power slides for even more slippery turns, and the Ghost has an afterburner now, so it can ram guys down, and is probably the most fun to drive vehicle now. It's really quite strong in multiplayer, since you can just run people over if the double plasma guns aren't enough. The vehicles can sure seem powerful, but both in the single-player game and the multiplayer game, you can hijack them if they're posing too much of a problem and if your opponent isn't very, very careful. Basically, you just need to get right up close to the side of the vehicle. You can't do it from the front because they're going to be trying to blow you away. And you hit X and you toss the pilot out and you get in, and hopefully you then proceed to run him down or something like that. The hijacking of the vehicles is probably the single greatest addition to Halo 2's gameplay. It doesn't dominate the game, but it's something that helps equalize the vehicles, and it gives you a way to handle them when you're on foot. And it also makes for some really satisfying moments at times, like when you maybe jack a guy in a high-flying Banshee and cause him to drop into a bottomless pit, or other cool stuff like that. Halo 2 also features a number of new weapons not found in the original game. Most of the original weapons do return, although there are a few absences, such as the good old assault rifle from the original Halo, Rest Its Soul. The most exciting of the new weapons is the energy sword, which some of the Covenant used to make your life miserable in the first game, but now you get to use yourself. You'll get to test all these out, both in the campaign and in the multiplayer, and of course in the game's two-player co-op mode, which can be tremendously fun as in the first Halo. But you can't play it online, you can't play it over System Link for whatever reason. You could only play it on the same console. It's still very, very entertaining, especially at the higher levels of difficulty where there are more bad guys and you really do need your partner there to help see you through some of the toughest fights. The co-op mode, of course, gives good reason to go back into the campaign for multiple go-rounds. So even though, the story isn't going to wow you in the end, you'll want to revisit the campaign probably multiple times when you factor in the difficulty settings and all that stuff. Like the original, Halo 2 supports up to 16 players in its multiplayer modes, though most people never got to experience the original game's full-scale multiplayer action. They're limited to the 4-player multiplayer on a single system, since setting up a System Link game wasn't exactly practical, and Xbox Live didn't actually exist at that time. Obviously, the ability to play Halo Online changes everything, and frankly, it's probably the best reason to get Halo 2. It's the most satisfying aspect of the game, and simply put, this is one of the best multiplayer shooter experiences around right now on any platform. Though the PC is home to some of the best multiplayer shooters, this multiplayer implementation stands tall even against that competition, so it's easily better than what you've got on most consoles right now. There's 7 different multiplayer modes. Some of the favorites from Halo return, like Slayer and Capture the Flag and Oddball, and there's some new ones as well, like Territories. Then within each of these 7 different modes, there are a whole bunch of different variants, sometimes about half a dozen or so. So, for example, with Slayer, which is Halo 2's deathmatch equivalent, you could play swords-only matches, or matches where some of the players can be invisible and things like that. So you could tweak out all the different modes of play and then apply them to any of the game's different maps. There are about a dozen maps that ship with Halo 2. This adds up to a whole bunch of different variety, and you could play it, with any number of players and any combination, tweak out all the rules, do all that stuff. You could customize this multiplayer action to whatever you want it to be. So that creates a lot of variety, but at the same time it creates some combinations that aren't going to be that much fun. For example, if you try a 4-player Capture the Flag match on a very large map, you might not have that much fun because there's just too much empty space. But chances are you're going to find some combinations that really suit you, and you can set up Xbox Live so that it only throws you into matches like that. And the whole Xbox Live implementation is just handled pretty slickly. There's some pretty cool features here, like how you can create a party online so that you don't just have to jump into a match on your own. If you have several people on your friends list that you regularly play with, you could kind of roll together in between different game sessions and hopefully end up on the same team or just keep fighting against each other. It's great that Halo 2 has all these different modes of play, but it's the actual action itself that's so much fun and the reason why you'll keep coming back to this multiplayer if that's what floats your boat. But basically, it just gives you really good feedback the whole time. The game feels just right. It gets the little details down right that a lot of other shooters mess up or don't take into consideration. You'll see very noticeable feedback when you're hitting your target, when you yourself are getting hit, when you need to reload, when you're losing a match, when you're winning a match, when your team needs help, all kinds of things like that. The game has these subtle little interface features that just make it very easy to understand what's going on in a match, even if you've jumped right in. So you don't need to feel like you're a big liability to your team as you're just learning to play the game. You could really just pick up and start playing, especially if you're experienced with Halo already. There isn't much of a learning curve here, provided that you're used to first-person shooters. The graphics aren't quite as good as maybe you'd hope. They've got some rather rough edges. Like, you'll see textures kind of pop in from low-res to high-res, and the cutscenes in the campaign are actually pretty ugly. But for the most part, the game looks superb. Like, the explosions of the vehicles in multiplayer, the location-based damage on the vehicles, and just the action itself, the animations, the physics, all this stuff. The game looks really excellent when you're playing it, as opposed to just kind of watching cutscenes or looking at some of the other frills. The audio is actually quite a bit better than the graphics overall. All the weapons just sound like they have a real punch to them, or sound distinctive, and you get a nice feedback on the controller as well to give you some rumble when you're firing away with them. There's excellent voice acting throughout the campaign, and the music is really sort of the crowning jewel of the audio performance, because it just kicks in at just the right moments during the campaign and makes the whole thing seem very epic and dramatic. So what can I say? Halo 2 is awesome. It's a spectacular game. It's tons of fun to play. It's especially fun to play online. It's probably the single greatest online console game ever, and it delivers for the most part on its promises by extending what was great about Halo and adding to it in ways that aren't drastic but are meaningful and well implemented, and make this game, marginally at least, more fun to play than the original. With all that said, the game isn't perfect. I hate to break it to you, but it just ain't. There are things about the story that could have been a lot better, and the campaign could have been longer easily. There are a lot of people that, with all due respect to the multiplayer, they want the single-player experience. Halo had such a great story, and the sequel is very interesting in and of itself, but it just doesn't have the follow-through that the original one did. But you can just keep going back in here and replaying both the single player and, of course, the multiplayer portion. And the whole thing is presented so well that it's just extremely fun to play, and it is, in fact, the must-have Xbox game that everyone was hoping it would be. And that says a whole lot for it. It's very few games that manage to succeed at this level.